credit or a required visit, that's also how we can verify your attendance. So that's just something good to know about how we use that information. And our workshop today, actually, give me one moment. This is the wrong workshop. All right, everyone, thanks for your patience. I was having a little bit of technical difficulties, which hopefully is something you can sympathize with, or at least have experienced sometime. Anyway, to get back into it, as I mentioned, we collect attendance this way. And I think Brenda, our amazing support person here in the Writing Center, is here in the chat. And I think she let everyone know that we are recording. So feel free to turn off your cameras and microphones or rename yourself and ask questions in the chat. And there will be a chance to ask questions at the end off camera. And if that's something, you know, if you want to know more about what we use the recordings for, we actually post these from a link on our Writing Center website to a Google Doc that has links to all the videos. And that Google Doc is something that only people with pipeline emails can access. So these recordings are specifically for the SBCC community, and they aren't shared outside this community. So just so you know, like who ends up seeing this video, is just our community. So, and also, yes, we are just happy to see you. Thanks for coming. I'm excited to have a few folks here, and I hope we can have a good conversation about today's topic. We're talking about writing anxiety and writer's block, and how you can, you know, sort of explore where those feelings come from. So we're going to have some time to do that, and also consider different strategies that could maybe help us address some of those things that come up for us. And as I said, my name is Michelle DeTore, and I will be presenting today. And the other thing I just like to share at the beginning of workshops, and is really part of our ethos here at the Writing Center, is just to make sure that everyone knows that everyone is welcome here. Our goal is to serve everyone who comes to see us, and we really value people coming to our service and sharing their energy and their learning with us. And so just so you know, the LRC, the Writing Center, is a place where you're welcome. It's your place. And of course, we also believe that your voice matters, and we're here to help you in developing that voice and feeling empowered to share that voice. And, you know, since I'm here representing the Writing Center, I just want to make sure you know about the SBCC Writing Center. I will also mention that a copy of this handout, this workshop, will also be posted on that Google Doc with the links to all the recordings. So there are some links in here that will be available to you, but I can go ahead and let's see, we can just drop maybe a link to the Writing Center in the chat, and that will give you access to explore that. One thing I really want to emphasize is that we are open for tutoring, and what's really exciting this semester is that we have an amazing crew of in-person tutors. And this is the semester that I feel like we're really returning to a more robust set of offerings for in-person. So I know a lot of folks are here, or most of us are here online, but I do want to let people know that that resource has been sort of expanded since last semester. And of course, we're still continuing to offer online tutoring appointments. So that's a good option for you if you want to connect with a tutor via Zoom. And you can also make appointments and access drop-in rooms for online tutors. And that's the last thing I'll just say, is that we do see students by appointment and drop-in. So, you know, we do that because we really want to accommodate everyone's schedule. So if you're the type of person you like to have an appointment, know you're going to have that specific time, we can support you. And if you're the type of person where you're like, I just don't know when I'm going to be able to make it, but I know I want to make it, we have drop-in services. And we're always happy to see you. And as well, on our website, we have additional resources. Great. So I know I just told you a lot about the Writing Center. And since we're talking about this topic of like the types of feelings that come up for us in the writing process that might be difficult or uncomfortable or make us feel like we can't actually get into the writing process really, again, just tutors are here. And then I will just shout out this one resource on campus. There are a number of amazing resources on campus that are here to support your health and well-being. But the one I do want to shout out here is counseling services. SBCC students have access to free counseling through our counseling service. And so if that's something that you feel would be supportive for you as you work through your schoolwork and have things that come up, I really encourage you to take advantage of that resource. It's great that it's free for students. So a link to that website is there. But I also just want to mention, things like the Dream Center, Umoja, Basic Needs that provides the food share. There are a number of resources on campus that can support you and just feeling good and making sure that, your needs can be met and, or at least, that you can get, come get some groceries and get some support if you feel like you need that. And so, yeah, we have a lot of great services here. So please, explore ones beyond just the counseling center. And so every workshop that we do here has student learning outcomes. And those are things that we hope students will be able to do as a result of attending one of our workshops. And so just to go over what those are, what we're hoping will happen for you is that after attending this workshop, that you'll be able to identify some of the causes for writing anxiety specifically for you, that it will give you a chance to kind of connect with that. That it will give you some support for matching particular strategies to the causes of anxiety, so that you can try using those strategies to address your concern. And I'll go ahead and say here, even though we're going to be talking about matching strategies throughout this presentation, I do want to make sure all of these strategies are available. They don't have to be necessarily matched to a specific cause, but that is a good way to start because we know there are some strategies that really do help in specific situations, but that's going to look different for everyone. And this is really kind of what I was just talking about, but applying strategies to your own writing process and feeling connected to your writing process and just really feeling like you have that support to get into the writing process, if you're having challenging feelings or feeling uncomfortable or anything like that, which of course those feelings always come up in learning, don't they, at some point? So that's also, some of these feelings are, also can be part of the learning process sometimes. Okay, and just to let folks know, if questions come up for you, feel free to raise your hand, unmute yourself, drop it in the chat, or save it for the end if you'd rather, but you can present questions at any time. Okay, so to sort of open up our conversation, we're just going to talk about, well, what are writing anxiety and writer's block? It seems weird. Anyway, so I invite anyone who's in the chat, if you have an idea of what writing anxiety or writer's block means to you, you can certainly put that in the chat. But I'm going to invite you to share more about your process after we get through this section. So you're welcome to share that too. So in order to just begin unpacking this question, we're going to talk about what these things are. So when we talk about something like writer's anxiety or writer's block, we're typically describing a set of like fearful or negative feelings around writing. And one of the things that's very interesting about writing anxiety is that writing anxiety may not occur every time you write. For example, you might feel perfectly fine writing an email to a friend, or at this point, I should probably say sending a text to a friend. I know there are a lot of people who don't email anymore, but that's the context in which you might feel really comfortable and you're doing writing all the time in that context. But then you might feel apprehensive about writing a paper about an article for school. So that's one thing to just keep in mind. It's interesting that most people have contexts in which they don't experience that anxiety. And so I think it's just really important to remember that writing anxiety and writer's block occur in some situations, but not all situations. And the reason I think that's interesting is because to me, it suggests we actually have the skills that we could potentially be transferring into the types of writing that make us anxious, but we don't always think about it that way. So if there are situations where you don't feel anxious writing, maybe think about, what the conditions are that make you feel more comfortable, and see if there are some of those conditions you can bring into school, because maybe that will help you feel less anxious and more ready to engage with the writing process. And then to just sort of talk about what writing anxiety and writer's block are not, they're certainly not a sign that someone is a bad writer, like absolutely not. And I would like to say that I do think some of the anxiety we might experience when we're writing might come from this idea that there are like good and bad writers, and like, I don't know, you just come into the world that way, like maybe like with a pencil or something. No, I mean, I think, that's right, being a good or bad writer, which are terms I would maybe even trouble, because I think we're all just practiced, or we're all practicing. Anyway, I don't think it's a particularly useful framework. So I always try to address that, because I don't think there are really bad writers. But that's totally, if you feel anxious, it's not a sign that you're a bad writer. And this is research based, like research shows that there's no correlation between writing anxiety and writing skills. And in fact, most people who practice writing professionally will also experience writing anxiety. So it's kind of comes with the territory, but it is something that you can become more comfortable with practice. And that's what we're hoping will set you up for today. The other thing is that it's not a part of someone's personality. It's not like, oh, so-and-so, like that's just the way they are. They just, again, it's not something like that. And this is the thing, like I was saying, people aren't born anxious or blocked writers. Rather, what we know for the most part is that they become anxious or blocked through negative or difficult experiences with writing. And so we're going to get into that. And lastly, writing anxieties and when writing writer's block, it's not something you only suffer from. In fact, I think particularly when students are writing in college, that's something that really regularly comes up. And in fact, 80% of UCLA students surveyed said that they had avoided courses, major fields of study, or even careers that require writing. So that gives you a sort of picture of like how common this issue is, when we're coming into these classroom spaces to practice our writing. And the thing that that strikes me about this statistic is also this idea that people are avoiding courses or major fields or careers that require writing because of that anxiety, because I always think of like, how many people are we losing who could really be contributing in those areas if they felt more supported and more confident. So I just want to put that out there too, that we're hoping that building confidence here will allow you to feel more confident exploring other opportunities. Now, thankfully, we know that identifying the reasons you feel anxious or blocked can help you adjust your approach to writing. And once you've identified the cause, you can explore strategies that will help you confront both the personal and practical causes of your anxiety. And I always like this picture of hope here with the balloons. And so what we're going to do now is actually do a little practice writing. And so you're going to have two options. You can either choose to free write or brainstorm in response to this question: why do I feel anxious or blocked? And again, you might want to consider specific search situations. If you're working on a writing project right now where you feel this, this uncertainty, you might want to think specifically about that one. And we're going to practice two strategies that can help alleviate some of the anxiety. And so the first one is to free write. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about free writing on the next slide, but I'm hoping maybe you've had an opportunity to practice free writing, but if you haven't, get really excited because you're going to learn about something super cool. So free writing is writing without stopping. You write every thought that comes to mind on the topic and you keep your pen moving the whole time. You're just flowing. And then the other strategy you can try, and this is one I really like personally, is brainstorming. And you can there are lots of different ways to brainstorm, but in this particular activity, the strategy we're offering to experiment with is a list. So in this case, you could just make a list of as many different answers to the question as possible. And in that case, you can just try to jot down key phrases and not use complete sentences. So this is the activity. And before we jump into it, I do just want to show you this next slide. Actually, never mind. I'm not going to show you the next slide. This is it. So let's take about 5 minutes to engage in this exercise. And then once we've had 5 minutes to practice, we'll come back together and hopefully some folks will feel like sharing. But if not, hopefully you'll have had some practice to prepare you for the rest of the presentation. Does anyone have any questions? Okay, great. So I hope you have a comfortable place and I will see you again in 5 minutes. Hey there. I hope everyone had a chance to do some writing. Oh, it looks like we have someone coming back in. So if you are still writing, go ahead and find a comfortable place to stop. And if you want to just sort of take a minute and sort of look over what you've put down and see if there's anything you've noticed. That's one thing you could do now. And so I'd like to give you a chance to do that. And then after looking at that, if there's anything you'd want to share about something that you feel like is specific to you or that you just think would make sense to put in the space and share with everybody, please feel free to do that. So yeah, if anyone feel, I'm just curious if what came up for you, and if there was anything you noticed, or you could also comment on just like what the experience was like of doing this exercise. Like if you made if you free wrote, like how did that go for you? If you did a brainstorm, how did that go for you? Also, no pressure to respond. I just want to make sure people have an opportunity if they do want to participate. So
I want to participate.
All right. Okay, so I think we'll just keep going. But hopefully that was a strategy that just gave you some practice. The thing I love about free writing is that it's writing that I feel like allows you to really discover things that you wouldn't otherwise. I don't know if that's true for everyone, but that's one of the things it does for me. The same with listing, but sometimes when I'm free writing, I'll find that something will come up and it's like not even something I was thinking about before. So I feel like that's a strategy that's really helpful for just exploring your ideas and taking away all the stakes and pressure. Nobody else has to see it. It can be messy. The most important thing is that it makes sense for you. All right, so getting to this slide, as we said, there's a great deal of variation among individuals, but there are some common experiences that writers in general find stressful. So when we think about those situations, one of the reasons we can feel really stressed out when we're writing is we might have unrealistic expectations about the writing process. And I'll be transparent here. I had planned my writing process to include time even to work on this presentation more. And so that was, somewhat stressful and I didn't get a chance to do it, but it's okay, did the best I could. But that's one of the things, like if I had this unrealistic expectation that I would have time available that I didn't. So that's also connected to time management. But that is one thing that can happen. And I think it happens to all of us, especially when we're working on something that's new or different, not something we don't always do. The other thing is just like feeling like you have nothing to say. Like I think all of us have had a feeling of like sitting in front of a computer or sitting in front of a blank piece of paper and just feeling like, what am I even going to say here? And that's also common, but that's also something that is, as we're exploring, connected to feeling uncomfortable, So the other thing, again, is adjusting to a new form of writing. If you're taking a comm class and you have to write an outline on a topic that's new to you, like that's going to be an adjustment. You haven't done that before. First time you do anything is going to be an adjustment, but sometimes that can also cause some anxiety or stress. And then writing for a reader or readers who have been overly critical or who you imagine will be. This one is one that I personally, if I could wave my magic wand and make something happen, this is the type of experience I would want to eliminate for people. But unfortunately, I think there are times where we've experienced, often maybe, in a classroom setting or in a learning setting, someone being very critical of our work or even just being lightly critical. I mean, even that can still make a real impact. So that can definitely cause anxiety. And, even just imagining they will be critical. And then again, this time thing, too much or too little. It's interesting how too much time can also create anxiety. I think we often think of too little time as the thing, but I know that's also a thing that happens for people. And then there are also times where you might just get an assignment and feel like it just seems unnecessarily difficult, or it seems unrelated to other things you're learning. And so that can be challenging. And then lastly, and I don't want to underestimate this one at all, especially after the past, several years we've had, dealing with troubling events or feelings outside of school. We're still technically in a pandemic. I think this is something that has probably come up for just about everyone in school, is that, there have been troubling events or feelings, even if it's just managing like uncertainty and concern, like, are we ever going back in person, or, those types of things. But that's also not to minimize the other types of experiences that, or events, feelings that occur outside of school. But that is a real thing. And, many students are, you're juggling different things. So that's, this is something that can happen too. So in terms of this unrealistic expectations about the writing process, this is a graphic from the comic Dimitri Martin, who used to do these like comedy sketches where he would also draw, like, to illustrate like his jokes. And so this is one of them. And so he has this drawing of success, and he says what people think it looks like. And it's just this like happy arrow, just like going up. Yes, success. But then the second illustration is like success, what it really looks like. And so you can see this arrow is like really having some like interesting deviations and experiences. That's what I imagine. These are all these different experiences that are important for something succeeding, but it may not look the way you think it's going to look at the beginning. And this is also just, this isn't just the writing process. This can sometimes just be life, but that, I think having an opportunity to step back and sort of think, well, yeah, the writing process is like this because I'm learning as I'm going. I'm going to explore things. I'm going to change my mind. And like, that's true for everyone. So it's not like some people have a version of like the straight arrow and other people do not, although we could get into a discussion of like what makes success easier for some people than others. But I think the thing here is just to remember when you're working that just because you feel like you're not just following some direction you had in mind, it doesn't mean that you're doing anything wrong. In fact, it might mean that you're really doing things that are right because you're exploring, you're developing, and you're growing. So that, and we know that growth can sometimes involve returning to some earlier point and picking it up that way. So I hope that all makes sense. That's my perspective, but I also, would invite you to just look at this graphic and see what it means, think about what it might mean for you. And then, when we think about, well, what would you do in this situation? Really, the thing is to just engage the process. If you have unrealistic expectations, chances are you're not really thinking about all those steps that will support you in getting to the place where you feel like your writing is communicating what you want it to communicate in the ways you want it to communicate. And that's, usually because, sometimes, we imagine someone sits down and they just like write a book, or they just like write in one sitting, it comes out perfectly. That's not, I don't know any writers who work like that. I'm sure there are some, but like I said, I don't know any. And the thing that I love about thinking about the process is that there's really no correct way to do it. There are strategies you can use and things people have learned have been helpful, but it's not like there's a correct way. And you are really, empowered, I think, when you're practicing writing in classes to really think about like, well, what works for me? What works for me? And to see, these offerings of strategies is really just ways to explore and experiment to discover what works for you. And so I think that's a really valuable strategy, is to think about experimentation and to think about exploration as part of your learning process, your writing process, and to really try to take some of the pressure off at the beginning. Yeah. And so here are just a few pictures that illustrate the writing process in different ways, just to represent all the ways they look different. We've got this one that's just like, arrows flowing around. You can sort of see that, what they call recursive, when it comes back to a place it was earlier. You can kind of see the pieces going around. This one represents that as like this cool spiral, kind of winding inwards, but also I feel like represents those, different points in time you might come back to. And then I like this one, it's real flowy. And then there's this one, that sort of is more, I think they call this, I can't remember, I think this might be like a fishbone organizing shape. But you can see it's like a different representation of the writing process. And, that's, everybody has a different picture. But again, looking at some of these pictures might help you explore your own writing process. And then when we think about the feeling like you have nothing to say, well, that can be related to that unrealistic feeling about the writing process, because that can definitely, if you feel like you're supposed to just know everything you want to say before your pen even hits the page, or your fingers hit the keyboard, or your voice hits the dictation, or whatever method you're using to write, if you think you're going to have it all figured out, then that can make you feel like you have nothing to say. And so I like this little graphic of this cow writing moo, 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 because I think it kind of amuses me. It's kind of an interesting little poem, but we can sympathize. I relate to this cow. And if you've never typed on a typewriter, this is an aside, you should try it because it's really fun. And that just reminds me, different ways of writing can also be fun. So even experimenting with a different medium. And so that's a place, again, where I would come back to, it's related to, it's engaging the writing process, but coming back to a part of the process that really feels open and free, so that you can discover what you have to say. I hope in the activity we did before, that as you engage those practices of free writing or brainstorming and listing, that it helped you discover things you had to say. And so then that's one thing you can do to figure out what you want to say, or at least beginning to explore those ideas so you get more clarity and, engaging your own curiosity and interest in what you do want to say. And the other thing I like, is to experiment with templates or graphic organizers. That can help if you're someone who really likes to see things like represented visually. And this is a link to what I think is now a service that you have to register for, but I'm going to try just popping out. This is just a type of mind mapping software you can use to start to map like that. And you can create those here. You can also create them, I think, in graphic organizers like Canva, which we have access to with our pipeline emails. And that can be a great resource too to find graphics. And then even just something, as simple as Googling, graphic organizers will give you lots of different, things you might be able to use to help organize your ideas. So that's another tool, is just to explore those types of things. And you might also want to listen to someone talking, there are different things you can do to help, just explore. But that's another one that I like, is just looking at images. So when we think about like why those strategies work, like the free writing and brainstorming, as mentioned, you see your thoughts on the page. If you're free writing, part of that process is to really turn off your inner critic off. There are no bad ideas. And you generate new insights through making yourself put thoughts in words. And that's one of the things that I think is so powerful about writing as a tool, is that it gives you a medium to explore your ideas. And I think you can write to yourself, you can, use it as a way to discover more about what you want to say. You also discover where you still have questions, and that can be really valuable. A question can be very useful in the writing process because it gives you a sort of direction. And then you gain confidence about the assignment as you realize you do have something to say. So that's another thing, is that doing those exercises can really help you feel more confident about that. And so one of the strategies you can use is also to talk about it. You can also, and this is something that I really, I experience with a lot of students who I have conversations with in the Writing Center, is that, when I begin to ask them questions, they have a lot to say. And it's interesting because a lot of times students will say things that are totally, it's language that can just go right into their writing. So talking is a great way to just, generate ideas, talking to friends. And writing is a social act. It's like we're often, doing it so that we can communicate with others or communicate with ourselves. But it's still, even in that context, it still has like a social aspect. And so talking is a great way to engage, or however you interact with your friends or people you feel comfortable with. And then the other thing I think is really great is like here in the LRC, we have a ton of study space for students. We have, a space for students to just get together and talk. And sometimes just putting yourself in that type of space gives you access to classmates, but you can also, specifically look for someone who you can write with. I used to during the pandemic, I would have Zoom writing sessions with friends where we were just on Zoom together with our volume off, but we could like see each other writing, and that helped, and we could chat each other if we wanted, but it was really just to be in solidarity and community. And of course, reaching out to your friends, family, but then also, of course, someone mentioned again, visiting a tutor. So if you're someone who likes to talk through your ideas, that's a great strategy to bring into your writing. And then confronting the critic. This one is tough because a lot of folks think their writing is worse than thinks their writing is worse than it is, because they're so critical. Like we have such an internalized sense of like what our writing should be like. So it can be very easy to be critical of our own work in a way that we would not be critical of someone else's work. So that's also something to think about. Like, try not to talk to yourself, any meaner than you would talk to a friend. That's probably stuff we're all working on. But this is where, again, I think this is maybe part of things like, using mindfulness, or, just giving yourself space to like remind yourself all those voices that are making you feel critical of your writing. They don't necessarily they come from received ideas, and they may not even be your voice. It's like you've brought there are other people in your head criticizing you. At least that's one way to think about it. And when you think about it that way, it's good to just remember, like, just because you can hear the thoughts doesn't mean it's true or worth listening to. And you always get to decide what's useful and what's not. And this, I think, if this is something you struggle with, I would just try to think about when you notice your inner critic talking, and to just decide, is this helpful to me right now? Is it helping me, learn, grow, explore, or is it blocking me? And you can actually talk back to that voice. You can say, I'm busy right now. Don't talk to me. And let it know you'd rather not hear from it in that moment or that way. And the one that isn't on here is to really just, again, try to support yourself with these strategies, because I think these are things we all struggle with throughout our experience as writers. But this is a practice you can use. And in fact, there's this notion of the gremlin in your head who is like always criticizing you. And some people even do practices where like they draw like their inner critic or something. And like, that's a way to kind of externalize it and remember, like, it's not necessarily like you, it's this like other, like you can create like with your imagination, a representation of like a gremlin who is just bugging you with criticism. And then of course, time. A writer might feel anxious when they're working with limited time or working with a lot of unstructured time. So here are some strategies for time management, but I really want to focus on the way we can manage time so that we really feel better. So one thing is to set aside times for writing when you're most relaxed or alert. I have a lot of students tell me like, oh, I was up all night writing this paper. And then I'll ask like, oh, is that when you get your best work done? And a lot of times what I hear is like, that's when I had time. That's when the house was quiet. I wasn't managing some other responsibilities. But this is an interesting question to ask yourself. Like, when do you feel most relaxed and alert? Because that might be the time when you should be doing your writing. And then also try to break the task into steps if you can. That can be another thing. You can make a writing schedule and or set goals. And you can use a calendar to draw an outline to visualize the writing process. And you can experiment with different tools for time management. I love using a timer. I use a timer a lot at home. It's a visual timer. I'll set it for 20 minutes and say I'm going to do dishes for 20 minutes. And like I get the task done, but it's small and I've broken it into a manageable step. I know doing the dishes isn't the same as writing, but you know, if you feel like you struggle with time, it's definitely a tool that I would recommend exploring. And I also like, this is an example of a tool I found a while ago, which I thought was really interesting because it kind of lays things out for you. I'll just show you how it works. It's called an assignment calculator. And so you can generate a writing schedule for yourself. So it will ask you, okay, what date are you beginning the assignment? And then let's say my assignment is due on 2/24. And then I'll pick the discipline I'm working on. I am working on a communication class. And then I'm going to hit this orange button that says calculate assignment schedule. And when I go down here, scroll down, this has generated a list of steps for me with dates. And the thing I like about this is that it actually links different resources for those steps. So I think this is a really cool tool. I'm the type, like for me, this like actually really helped me think about, you know, the different steps I would do. And I will note, you know, you can see that this was designed for, I think, Rochester Institute of Technology. So you'll see some of those RIT things, but, you know, if you're using this tool, just switch that out with this SBCC resource. But again, this is, I think, a great tool if you just need some help getting structure, and it makes steps for you. And you might look at this and say, I don't need to do them in this order, or this is necessary for me, but maybe get some ideas of how you do want to structure your time. And speaking of time management, I'm noticing the time, and it is 3:47. And so we have about 13 minutes left. And so I'm going to pick up the pace a little bit, but don't hesitate to ask questions in the chat or to raise your hand. Oh, and as I mentioned, timers, and I know that there's a lot of this, you know, there are more of these supports that help you also manage your time when you're on the internet. So things like web blogging, so software, if you have like a focus mode on a device or something like that, you know, explore using those tools to see if that helps you feel more supported with the time management. And of course, we mentioned earlier, doing something new is something that can cause anxiety. You know, new audiences, new subject matter. Maybe in a class, you're being asked to turn in different parts of your writing process and you're not used to that. Like some teachers, and I actually think this is amazing teaching practice for supporting writing, but will actually have their students turn in assignments at different stages of the writing process. So they have an opportunity to get feedback from the instructor, from their peers. You know, they've got that draft done, and it really supports you in the writing process because you have to turn something in. But, you know, so I think, but sometimes that can feel anxious, right? You're like, I'm going to show someone my draft. You know, it's not done. Of course it's not. That's kind of the point. But of course it makes sense, you know, to feel anxious when you're dealing with a new situation for the first time. But again, chances are, you know, some of these situations will really, you know, not every situation, but, you know, again, asking yourself, is this a new situation that's going to help me learn or grow? And if you're not, you know, and, you know, we're also always here in learning support to support you in that. So if you're in a situation where you're like, I don't know, come talk to us. And so again, thinking of doing something new as practice, and this is kind of my perspective on writing in general, is that, you know, we all are writers in some way. If we're here writing, you know, everyone here working on a piece of writing is a writer. And, you know, I just think writing is a great practice. It's a practice, you know, it's a thing we can practice. It's a thing we can use to express ourselves. but also just practicing, like, the way you practice anything new. And so it's a part of the learning process, and it is a skill, and skills require practice. Like if you want to be a chef and you go to culinary school, like, I don't think your knife skills, you watch these cooking shows and they're like, it's amazing. They have these people have amazing knife skills. I would think that requires practice, right? Like, especially if it's sharp, so it's a skill, and it requires practice like anything else. And so you have to, I think, be in a mindset where you allow yourself to make mistakes and to just sort of think about, like, writing in new situations can be rewarding. Not every format or audience will be right for you, but you won't know which ones might be right until you try them. And this is a place where I also would just invite you to think about any writing experiences that have been rewarding and what it was about those experiences that made it feel that way. And of course, as we discussed, an assignment can seem difficult or unrelated. I have certainly I can sympathize with this dog who has very good paws resting on a book, actually sleeping on a book. And this can feel, if an assignment seems unrelated, it can certainly trigger feelings of anxiety and frustration. And in those cases, certainly things like taking time to read the assignment with care and purpose. Sometimes we feel that way because we got a very complex assignment and we're still processing it. So support yourself by returning to the prompt, and really, give yourself time to understand it. And to ask questions. This is really useful. If something seems difficult, ask questions, look at examples, connect with resources. And this is where, again, like, some of these things might come from your instructor. Like, you might have a question for your instructor. You might ask your instructor if they have an example of an assignment. Some instructors will be really helpful in sharing that, obviously tutors. And then don't forget about the other course materials you have around, like your course text and your syllabus. Sometimes we'll sit down to write and we don't have all those things, and that can make us feel anxious, and maybe we don't have the resources that would help support us or answer the questions we have. And we also have resources here. And again, just don't try to do everything at once. And then, of course, as we mentioned, life gets tough. Troubling events or feelings that are not related to school can contribute to writing anxiety or feeling blocked. And this is a place where I would really just encourage you, if things are happening and they're stressful and, you're not feeling, as great as you could be, like, definitely, give yourself permission to reach out for help or accept help. Especially if you have someone who seems like they'd be a good listener or supportive, a friend, a family member, a mentor. There's people who really support you, believe in you. Reach out to one of them. Again, I mentioned counseling services earlier. And ironically, you can also write about it. Writing can be a great way to work through your feelings and reduce stress, because again, you're externalizing it. And it's one of those things that doesn't really make sense until you do it. And then I also, get creative. Like we said, draw a picture of your critic, change your perspective. For example, try getting a bird's eye view of your work. Sometimes this is really cool. You can spread out everything you have and, like, look down at it and kind of walk around it, or, move around it in a way that helps you see it in a different way. You can cut your paper into pieces and tape them to the wall and, see what that's like. And you can experiment with using highlighters, crayons, markers, big pieces of paper. And then you can read your paper in the voice of your favorite movie star, or read your paper to your pet hamster. So we're not going to have time to do this activity, but the second part of the activity, which is posted on our where the recordings go, that writing skills workshop page with the videos. I invite you to look at that activity, because it's going to give you chances to just, like, reflect on the things that came up in your brainstorming, and then to give you a chance to just identify a cause that you think you could try to address that. And, just to remind you that we do have specific resources at the Writing Center developed around some of these things. These are just a list of resources that could be helpful for you in dealing with anxiety, but we have a lot more. And just want to say thank you for attending. I'm Michelle DeTore. Emma Treyas is our other LTA. Yvonne Ornelas is actually, she left the Writing Center. She's at DSPS now, but she's amazing. And now we have Brenda Ocampo Ortiz here in also supporting the Writing Center. And we just want to thank all of you for coming. We're really always happy to see you. We're here to support you. And yeah, thanks for coming. When you look at this presentation, you'll see here all the sources for the images and slide graphics I used. And I think that's about it. So thanks for coming.